All right, today what we're going to look at is section 9.1, which is square roots. The goal of today is that I can evaluate and approximate square roots. First thing we want you to do is we want you to try the exploration. So in the first one, try taking 3 squared. Now the answer is going to be 3 times 3, which is equal to 9. Then what we want you to do is try number 2. The answer to number 2 is negative 3 times negative 3. Negative 3 times negative 3 is going to give you a positive 9. Try number 3. The answer for number 3 is 5 times 5, which is 25. And the answer for number 4, well, first try it out. And the answer is negative 5 times negative 5, which is 25. Then it says, what is the inverse operation of squaring a number? The inverse operation for squaring a number is when we have the square rooting a number. All right, now on to some notes. The inverse operation of squaring a number is finding a square root of a number. Square roots are written with a radical symbol, which looks like this. The number underneath the radical symbol is called the radicand. So in my example down below, 16 is my radicand. My square root symbol is called my radical. All right, let's do a couple of examples. So number 1, if we look at the square root of 64, what we are doing is we are looking to see what number, when multiplied by itself, gives us 64. In this case, I know that 8 times 8 is equal to 64. So I'm going to pull out one of those 8s and drop the square root sign, so my answer is 8. On the second one, we have a negative sign. The negative sign is going to stay out front. We're going to say, hey, what's the square root of 64? That's going to be 8. So negative 8. Number 3, we have these things called plus or minuses. Plus or minus means that it can either be positive or it can be negative. So we're going to have plus or minus. We know the square root of 64, which is 8. So my answer is plus or minus 8. So this is actually saying 2 things. We actually can say that we have 8 and we have negative 8. So that's what the plus or minus sign means. Number 4, if I take the square root of negative 64, this one is saying, hey, if we have 2 numbers that multiply to give us 64, if I try and do 8 times 8, that should give us 64. That doesn't, negative 64, that doesn't, gives us 64. If I take negative 8 times negative 8, that gives me positive 64. Doesn't give me negative 64. The only way I can get negative 64 is if I take 8 times negative 8. Unfortunately, what we said is we have to be multiplying the number by itself to get the number inside. So in this case, there's nothing that we can do to get that, so we call this one undefined. All right, we want you to go ahead and try number 1. The answer to number 1 is going to be plus or minus, square root of 100 is 10. Go ahead and try number 2. The answer to number 2 is negative 5. Go ahead and try number 3. The answer to 3 is 6. And go ahead and try number 4. The answer to number 4 is 4. One thing I should be doing is I should be boxing my answers so that we all know what the final answer is for each of these. Sometimes our work can get kind of messy, and we want to make sure and box those final answers. On the back side, a perfect square is a number made by squaring a whole number. Now, for the perfect squares, there's some that you have to know. For example, you should know these perfect squares. So we have 1, which is 1. So if I take 1 squared, I get 1. If I have 2, I get 4. If I take 3 squared, I get 9. If I take 4 squared, I get 16. If I take 5 squared, I get 25. If I take 6 squared, I get 36. If I have 7 squared, I get 49. If I take 8 squared, I get 64. If I take 9 squared, I get 81. If I take 10 squared, I get 100. If I take 11 squared, I get 121. And if I take 12 squared, I get 144. These are numbers that you should have memorized. So you should have your perfect squares up until 12 squared memorized. However, when we take the square root of a number that is not a perfect square, we approximate the answer. So, in my example, my first example that I have is the square root of negative 49. Obviously, we know the square root of 49 is 7, and we know we have to include the negative out front. So we have negative 7. However, if I try and do the square root of 3, the square root of 3 is a little bit more difficult because there's nothing, two numbers. Well, it's not obvious which two numbers I should multiply to give me 3. So this is where you're going to have to use your calculator. So if you use your calculator, we're going to go ahead and use the calculator. And if I do the calculator, I'm going to do the square root of 3. Now, if I do the square root of 3, I already did it, and I get 1.7320. We have to remember that we want to round to the nearest hundredth. So this one is our 10th. This is our 100th. So we're going to do 1.73. For number 3, the square root of 36. This is one that we have up above. We know the square root of 36 is 6. On number 4, the square root of 8. We don't know that, but I know it's going to stay negative. And I'm going to do the square root of 8. So I'm going to have to do 8. And then I'm going to do square root. Depending on which calculator you do, you might have to do it in different orders. And if I do this, I'm going to round to the nearest hundredth. So this is my 10th. This is my 100th. The next number is an 8, so that tells me I'm going to round this 2 up to a 3. So I get 2.83. Let's look at the next one. What we are going to do is we are going to evaluate b squared minus 4ac, given that a is 1, b is negative 2, and c equals 3.
Evan Van Dyke, the bus is waiting for you at back. Evan Van Dyke.
So it's going to be negative 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 3. If we do this, we know negative 2 squared gives us 4. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. Negative 4 times negative 3 is plus 12. Square root of 16. Square root of 16 is 4. All right, time for you to practice. So go ahead and practice on number 1. The answer is 10. Try number 2. The answer for number 2.
Tyler Trumbo. Please come to the front office. Tyler Trumbo.
Is negative 2.24. Number 3, try it out. The answer is 4.8. Try number 4. The answer for number 4 is negative 9. And lastly, try number 5. The answer for number 5 is going to be 8 squared minus 4 times negative 1 times 20. This will give you 64 plus 80, which is the square root of 144, and our answer comes out to be 12. Good. On the last page, we have some other examples. So on these, we want to make sure that you understand this plus or minus sign. Now, if we do this, we're going to evaluate the following expression and round the answer to the nearest hundredth. So if I do the square root of 6 plus or minus the square root of 5, I have to know what the square root of 5 is. So if I do the square root of 5 in my calculator, I'm going to take 5, and the square root of that gives me 2.24. I have to round this up to the nearest 4, so 2.24. So this will be 6 plus or minus 2.24. Now I'm going to have two answers. My two answers are going to be one with the positive and one with a negative, so 6 minus 2.24. So 6 plus 2.24 gives me 8.24, and 6 minus 2.24 gives me 3.76. All right, number 2. If I do 4 plus or minus 8, first thing I have to do is I have to figure out what 8 is. So 4 plus or minus, the square root of 8 is 2.83. Then I'm going to have two answers. I'm going to have one be 4 plus 2.83, and I have another one be 4 minus 2.83. This first one will give me 6.83, and my second one will give me 1.17. Number 3, first thing I have to do is I have to figure out what the square root of 3 is. So it's going to be 2 plus or minus the square root of 3, which is 1.73. And I'm going to be taking this to the third power. So I'm going to have two answers. I'm going to have one be 2 plus 1.73, and this other one be 2 minus 1.73. If I do this in my calculator, it comes out to be 1.24 and 0.09. Number 4, if I try this, I have to know the square root of 6. So I'm going to take 3 times the square root of 6, which in my calculator is going to be 7.35. I'm going to have two answers, one positive, so 2 plus 7.35 divided by 4, and one negative. And when I do this, I will now have 2.33 and negative 1.34. All right, let's have you try some. Try number 1. The answer is going to give you 9.73 and 6.27. For number 2, go ahead and try it. The answer is negative 0.34 and negative 11.66. Try number 3. The answer for 3 is going to give you negative 11.24 and negative 2.76. Try number 4. The answer is going to be 1.17 and negative 0.62.